السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. I'm going to say that one more time because I think lunch hasn't kicked in yet. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. You know, this topic of the youth, because I'm such a young man myself, is very important to me. And I want the parents and the leaders of this community to listen very closely to the words that we have to share. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it beneficial for ourselves and for our youth, and that they stand up and they take what is theirs, which is the rights of this ummah and the responsibilities of this ummah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِّمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They do good deeds. وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And this ayah has a very specific and interesting aspect of Arabic grammar. It has noon at-tawkeed, the noon of emphasis. In Arabic, inni and innani, they may sound the same, but they give a different aspect of what you are saying. وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And these people who call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they do good deeds. They say, indeed, we are proud, we are honored to be amongst the Muslims. I've been asked to talk to you today about youth as the architects of the future. Those who prepare the future, those who create the future, those who build the building of the future. But in order to talk about the future, I have to go to the past. I have to go more than 1446 years ago, before the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, to the small town of Yathrib, which will be known as Medina in 2 or 3 years. I want to go and talk about the two tribes of Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, two tribes that have been fighting now for decades. Blood has been spilled. Mothers have been crying over the death of their sons and their husbands and their fathers. Blood upon blood upon blood. Because of an old feud that happened over 50 years ago, year by year they meet and they fight and they kill each other. There are people to which Islam has not yet come, and the youth are becoming angry. And the young men and the young women of the town are becoming tired of this feud. And this feud continues and builds and builds and builds until the name of the day of Yawm al-Bu'ath, the day of the war of Bu'ath. Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, they meet on the battlefield and they again engage in a bloody war. But this is unlike the wars that came before. Al-Khazraj, the larger tribe, completely decimates Al-Aws. And as Al-Aws flees the battlefield after the first stage of loss, the chieftains of Al-Khazraj begin to make fun of them, talking about their humiliation, talking about their defeat, talking about their weakness, talking about their pathetic attempt at protecting themselves. And the chieftain of Al-Aws, who sees his people fleeing, knowing this is a level of humiliation, and understanding of the context that these people are not Muslim, they have not received the hidayah of Islam. And so he, as a tribal leader of his people, while he is on his horse, takes his spear out and stabs himself in the leg, and he falls off of his camel. And he says to his people, Wallahi, I swear by Allah, because of course they still believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they had set up partners with him. A'udhu billah. He said, I will not move from this spot until they kill me. If you, my people, must run, run away. Go. But I will stay and I will die the death of honor. At this, Al-Aws, the smaller tribe that has been defeated, looks at Abu Usaid, who is their leader. And they say, and they feel a reinvigoration of their spirit. Despite the death of their major leaders, despite the death of their elders, despite the death of their nobles, they turn around and they begin to advance on the Khazraj. And they advance and they advance and they advance until they completely destroy the Khazraj. But they don't stop there, because there is no Islam, and in their hearts is Jahiliyyah. They go too far. They go into the homes of Al-Khazraj and they begin to burn them to the ground. They go into their gardens and their orchards from their visceral hatred of lineage, of tribalism, of asabiyya, of racism. And they burn and burn and burn. Until a young man by the name of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, who is barely 25 at the time, stands up and he tells his people, what are you doing? Is this our honor? Is this what we do? While we may have disagreements with al-Khazraj, they are our brothers in religion. They are both polytheists. They are our people. We have lived with them. We fight with them, but is this how we respond? And slowly he calms the people down. And time passes, and Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh becomes one of the leaders of Al-Aws. Al-Aws then begins to work with Al-Khazraj, and they realize that because of all of the killing, all of the bloodshed, all of the blunders that have happened, their position in Yathrib has now weakened. But there are other people in Yathrib. There are other people that are not polytheists in Yathrib. Who are they? The Yahud of Medina, Banu Qaynuqa', Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayza, and they are gaining power. And so Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, they say to each other, we need to team up together. We need to work together. Young people, because their elders have died, they are tired of the ways of old. And they say we need to change how we engage with this world. And now on the 10th year of da'wah, while the Prophet ﷺ is going and meeting secretly with the Hujjaj that have entered Mecca, he sees a small tribe of 6 people that have come from Khazraj. And he asks, and who are you? They say, we are from a small tribe in Yathrib. We are al-Khazraj. And he calls them to Islam. 6 young men and 6 young women. And they accept Islam. They go back to their people. And there is still some enmity between Khazraj and Al-Aws. And he goes, these 6 young men and women go and they speak to Al-Aws. And they send a delegation to the Prophet ﷺ. The next year, the 11th year of the da'wah. And they say, we are bringing more of us, but we are going to come together. So 10 people from Khazraj and 2 people from Aws come and they accept Islam. Just 12 people. 12 young men and 12 young women. But from their work, from their effort, we see the city of Medina today. They set the ground for An-Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam to enter that city and find in every single home a Muslim. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam sends with them at this point, who? Al-Mus'ab al-Nu'ayr, the young man of Quraysh, barely 20 years old at this time, accepted Islam at 16, from one of the richest tribes or sub-tribes of Quraysh. They say that when he would enter a street, his perfume would be so strong that the other side of the street would know Mus'ab has entered the street. He was the companion. His mother would have his shoes and his clothes made in Yemen and brought to him. But when he was made shaheed in Uhud, at the age of less than 30, he did not have enough on his body to cover his head for the janazah. If they would cover his head, his feet would show. And if they would cover his feet, his head would show. And so they had to bury him in the grave, covering his body with twigs and leaves. A young man who became the first ambassador of Islam. He opened the city of Al-Madinah for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now what does this have to do with youth as architects of the future? What does this entire introduction have to do? If you will do me the honor, if you're Muslim, raise your hand. The numbers don't add up. If you're Muslim, raise your hand. How many of you have heard of the city of Medina? How many of you have visited the city of Medina? It is these young people who left their society, they pushed back the hatred of their parents and their elders, that prepared you to be Muslims today, that prepared the groundwork of Medina to be built, that prepared and changed the world. Why? وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. They knew in their heart that this religion was a religion of honor. This religion honored them and gave them pride in a way that nothing else could. And they were so indebted to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The entire world changed because of the efforts of young people. One of the most important stories of the Quran, which we read every Friday in Surah Al-Kahf, is the story of young people. إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةِ remember the story of the young men, the young people, who stood against a tyrant king. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immortalized their story in the Quran. Young people, young men and young women have an important responsibility and role in this ummah. If you want to know how to be architects of the future, you have to look at the architects of the past. Look at the likes of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, his willingness for change, his love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his willingness to sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice for this religion, such that he opened the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When nobody was willing to take the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was exiled from Mecca, when no tribe was willing to offer him anything, two little tribes, two young groups of people, Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, the young men and the young women, opened their doors, prepared the city, and 11 years later, on the 9th year of Hijrah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and took back the city of Mecca with the help of who? Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj. But no longer are they known as Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj. They changed their name to who? Al-Ansar, the helpers. They come together under the banner of Islam. They come together under the banner of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they become the helpers of An-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is legacy. This is the responsibility of the youth. And this is what our young people are capable of. If you want to look at the architects of the future, you have to look at the architects of the past. Look at the likes of Usama bin Zayd, nearing the end of the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the son of his adopted son Zayd ibn Haritha. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam makes his 17-year-old boy, 17-year-old man I should say, the general of the army that is going to Sham, 17 years old. And under him are Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anh inside of his army. Look at how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prepared young people, how he made them ready to take on the world. Look at the two young men, Mu'adh ibn Amr and Mu'awwidh ibn Arfa', 16 and 17 years old. And it was by their hands, by their swords, that the tyrant of this ummah, Abu Jahl, fell in Badr. 16 and 17. The same man that used to take the entrails, the guts of camels and donkeys and tie it around the neck of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca. And a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old came together, as Abdul Rahman Ma'awf says, like eagles attacking the enemy of Islam. 16 and 17, and they brought down the Fir'aun of this ummah. Look at the potential of young people. Look at the responsibility they felt over this deen. Look at their effort and their sacrifice. Mu'adh radiallahu anh lost his entire arm in that battle. For the rest of his life, he lived with one arm. Look at Muhammad al-Fatih, at 21 years old, when Constantinople was taken over by the Romans and the Byzantines. He came and he freed the city. It is because of him that through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when we go to Turkey for our vacations, we can hear the adhan. We can go to the masajid and pray there. 21 years old, and he changed the world. He changed his town, he changed his people. And he made the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the religion of Islam qayyim in that land. Look at the likes of Aisha radiallahu anha, the faqihah of the ummah, the scholar of this ummah. She taught companions and tabi'een, atba tabi'een, many over 2,200 narrations in hadith literature come from her, Aisha radiallahu anha. She was a poet, she was a doctor of medicine who learned tib al-nabawi. She learned the medicine of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She learned the Greek medicine, and she would teach people, men and women in the ummah, on how to do these things. How old was she when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away? 18. 18. And she was the faqihah of the ummah. Look at our past. Look what we have to offer. It is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He brings support for this religion and change to the world through the young people, young men and women of the ummah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Rum, Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min da'f. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created you in weakness. He created you as a child, as a baby. You couldn't do anything. ثُمَّ جَعَلَ مِن بَعْدِ ضَعْفٍ قُوَّةٍ. But then after this period of childishness, of weakness, He gives you a period of strength. This is your period of strength. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after this period of strength, ثُمَّ جَعْلَ مِن بَعْدِ قُوَّةٍ ضَعْفًا وَشَيْبًا. After this period of strength is over, after this time of opportunity is over, you will return back to weakness, and you will return back, or you will even go further and have gray hair. You will become so weak you can't do anything. What time do you have if not this time? What strength do you have if it's not the strength that you use now? And now I'll change my talk from the youth to the elders. Those who lead our community. There are no people too young to lead, but they are too inexperienced to lead. You have to give them the opportunity to enter the spaces, the masajid, the organizations, to learn this religion as a religion that is holistic in every aspect of life. Every human being, every Muslim has something to offer this deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to give them the opportunities. You have to give them the time and the effort and the mentorship that allows them to take these organizations that you've built and to lead them in the future. All the masajid in this country, all the Muslim organizations in this country, they were built by our parents. They were built by our elders. But our elders, if you do not prepare us, who will lead them in 20 years? Who will lead them in 30 years? If you do not show us how to parent, how will we parent? If you do not show us how to lead, how will we lead? And this is the responsibility of you to bring them in. And it is the responsibility of the youth to then reply to the invitation. Young people, it is your turn now. You have power, you have a voice, and most importantly, وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. You have this religion. Everything we see that has been built by our older generations, we have to make better and grow. But if you do not do it, who will do it? If you don't take the responsibility, you don't follow the likes of Mus'ab radiallahu anh, or Sa'id ibn Mu'adh, or Aisha radiallahu anhuma, who is going to do it? And if you do not prepare them, who will take over? But from the past, we learn how to engage with the future. What we're seeing right now in Gaza, now an entire year has passed. The Lancet, which is a medical journal, released their estimation, a medical estimation of the amount of people that have been killed in Gaza. They say it is over 180,000 people that have died. 180,000 people. The numbers that are reported of the 45,000 are death due to direct warfare. But what about disease? What about the destruction of hospitals? What about the inability to have food and water? 180,000 people. For the past 76 years, the regime that exists in the area, the Zionists, have continued and continued, unabated. Nobody has stopped them. But for the first time in history, we're seeing a change. In May of this year, at Columbia University, a group of students, young people, young men and young women, came together and decided this is unacceptable. And they built an encampment in the center of campus. From that one encampment, it increased to 10. It increased from 10 to 40. And now 60 encampments have been made in the United States alone. From those encampments, we have encampments that have now come in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, in the Netherlands. A global phenomenon. And never in the 76 years have we seen that regime, the Zionist regime, so scared as they are now, spending $20 million just to get one person in office in New York. How did this happen? What caused the change? Young men and young women, young people. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you strength. Allah mentions in the Quran, it has nothing to do with me. مِن بَعْدِ ضَعْفٍ قُوَّةٍ. After weakness, He gave you strength. I will leave you with the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imam al-Dari radiallahu anhu, he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood on the pulpit and he said, this matter, this religion of Islam will certainly reach every single place that has been touched by the night and been touched by the day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not leave a home or a residence except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause Islam to enter it in some way, by which the honorable of them will be honored, and by the disgraceful of them will become disgraced. Allah will honor those that are honorable amongst them by accepting them into Islam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will disgrace those who are already disgraceful by causing them to reject it. Islam has already honored you, O young people. How will you honor it? How will you respond to the call of Islam? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people of understanding and make us agents of positive change. And that when we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, we will have an excuse for Him. While our brothers and sisters were suffering, while our communities were dying, we stood up and we did something about it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.